Stay tuned while I show you how to pour, flood coat, and top coat this beautiful design. Okay, so I've mixed up a couple of the buckets and then I'm gonna remix as I go because I like to be able to adjust those buckets in case I need them a little bit lighter or a little bit more of one color. So this is going to be a softer design, pretty linear. So I'm gonna start the design here, do some movement, but not a lot of twists and turns because her kitchen is very linear. I'm gonna walk this all the way down. So this is very similar to like a fantasy marble where it has different layers of colors, but she wanted some softness to it. This is a back butler counter. So immediately I'm knowing that there's a lot of brown in this bucket, and so I know I'm gonna have to adjust this for some of the other layers. So I'll use some of the darker sections, knowing that I'm gonna come in and sort of separate that. This is a backsplash that's gonna go up to the cabinet level. I also don't like the backsplashes to be very busy, so I'll end up pouring some bigger sections of color once we get to that part. So these are going to be mostly my darker buckets, and then I'm going to remix some lighter buckets. I've added some bright gold on top and added a little more white to this bucket. That's pretty, I like that. I'm gonna connect that. I'm gonna continue that right over here. I'm gonna use what's a little bit left here of that white and just kind of separate these two bands of color. Boom, 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 boom. Oh, that's very pretty. I'm gonna cut it off right here. Now this is the cool thing you can do is just, if your bucket is getting too dark, just save a little of your light and add to it as you go. I like to add a little of that gold in there. Maybe put a little more of that white just to break it up. And then continue your pour. So here I'm going to continue it in this little gap. I love that hint of gold, so you can continue to like add those layers as you go. You know, add a little bit left of another color and then continue to pour it. So I'm going to break up this section with this lightness, and then I'll probably add even more white to it in just a bit. So I'm going to pour bigger instead of, usually I go really slightly pouring, just little bits. I'm pouring out bigger amounts because I want the softer bands of color to pop through. All right, so I've added some more white and then just put in the silver, or I'm sorry, the pewter and some gold, a little of that nebula, and no browns on this part of it. On something this small, I'm going to tilt this counter a bit just to give it some more natural movement. Okay, so I'm going to give it a quick torch. Anywhere that you want it to move more, torch more in that area. So let's say that I don't want this to move, I wouldn't have torched that. But this I kind of want it to all flow. But you can focus your torching just on one, section at a time if you want. I'm just gonna hold this a little bit and tip it forward just so it softens the lines. I'll come around front, do the same, and probably do it a little diagonal too. So I'm going to sort of do it diagonal where I'm holding just this corner up. I'm kind of going to that back edge. It's going to fill in any dry spots that are there because I did that skin coat. So I'm already liking that a lot. It's very natural, it's soft, it's going to keep softening once we pull the tape, but it's the right amount of balance and color that you want. So I'm going to leave this one alone, hit it with alcohol in just a bit. So again, I'm going to pour kind of a big amount where normally I have it a little bit smaller and more controlled, but I want it to spread out and have softness. And I'll tilt this too. This is the backsplash that goes right behind the counter that we just tilted. What I'll do before I tilt, anything that's dry, I'm just gonna touch it. It looked like there's only a couple spots, just so when I move it, I don't lose all the epoxy. So let me torch it. Same fashion that I did before, I'm going to tilt it a little forward. See how much it's moving? This part here was brand new, so it's a little warmer. I'm going to tilt this way a bit. And I do want this band of color to make it down there. So that's what I'm going to heat up. So you can see that started to blend and move into that skim coat. And then I'll still probably have to add a little bit more to this, but that softened up this look tremendously. I can take my hand and add, but I'll probably just use remnants in a bucket and pour some little pops of color here and there, but we'll let this one sit for just a little bit and finish the other counter. Breaking up this gold a little. Just adding a hint of lightness through it. So as you can see right here, it's kind of soft, and I like the soft, but I want to create a little bit of detail towards this back side. So I mixed up a little more in my cup with some skinny little additives of those colors, so that way it'll create some cool effects. And that'll look really pretty when it flows over the edge. Adding a little touches of these browns that are going to flow off, but just so that way it breaks up where there's too much of one color. A tiny bit towards the front as well. I'm going to follow this all the way across the front edge, just adding little bits of color. And I know most of this is going to flow off, but that way the rock edge looks really cool too. I'm going to add some fine lines to the backsplash and then probably tilt it again. this little section. Just adding some fine lines. So I just want to lighten this up. I added some white spray paint on the top for some cool effects. So when I hit it with alcohol and the torch, it'll kind of lace. I still want the brown, I just don't want as much. I think that'll soften nicely. When you torch white spray paint that was on the top of the bucket, this is what it does. So you see how it kind of laces through there? And as it spreads out, when I pull the tape, it's going to create a really beautiful effect. Okay, to create some really fun stone effects, I use 99 isopropyl alcohol, and I'm going to spray it in my hand. And I'm going to use big drops throughout the piece. You don't have to do this. You don't have to make them big. You don't have to put them everywhere. You can use a fine little mist. It's really your call. I just like the effects that it makes, and this has been about an hour since we started mixing, and as you can see, it's breaking up the colors really nicely, but not too much. It's just going to create some nice effects. When we pull the tape, it'll soften even more, but I love the way it looks. So I'm going to do that across this big counter. Some areas you can just flick your fingers. You can still do it from a bottle, like if you come up high and just kind of spritz it, that'll work too. I just like doing it on my hand. I feel like it gives me more control over where it's going. I'm gonna break up some of that gold, even though it's so pretty, but I think it'll look really pretty broken up too. Now this really only works if you're using mostly mica powders. And then of course I have a spray paint in there. If you're using mostly paste or spray paints, it doesn't create that same type of effect where you can see the bubbles. Like I love this. Can you see this up close? Looks like little bubbles in there. Now that's gonna soften, it won't stay that way, but I love how it looks with that type of mica powder. Finally on the backsplash, and then we will pull tape and let this thing soften up naturally. All right, that's good. Time to pull tape. We'll just let that start to drip and then we'll torch it. And on these edges here, we just help the epoxy move down and flow over.
Oh, wait, we done that?
You just want to push the epoxy into the nooks and cranny of the rock edge. If there's a design portion flowing over, let it flow, don't touch it. But right now, most of ours has like a single color for the most part, so we're just pushing it in And I've already pre-fogged the edge of the rock edge and also used a bag technique on it. And I will link the video that shows exactly how I do that, so you can see that as well. And then of course, make sure you rub your hand underneath your piece as well, so that way the epoxy flows under and encapsulates your entire counter. It can be deceiving and look like you have epoxy somewhere if you fog your edges. So just, you know, get down low so you can see if it's paint you're seeing or epoxy. You definitely want to make sure you don't leave any bare spots. And then on the inside of your sink, let it flow over. And then just make sure, help it along if it needs a little bit. Same situation here where you want to run your hand underneath the sink edge and encapsulate it. And you don't want to rub across your whole sink because obviously they're just bleh. I can talk. There's a design here and I want the color to continue to flow over. So I'm just gently helping it along and pushing the same color. Whatever's there, I push that same color into it. How's this side, Jeremy?
Great.
Excellent. All right. By the time we're done pulling the tape on the rest, we can torch everything because the alcohol will have off-gassed and won't light it on fire. Okay, so as you can see on the front here, it's very, very soft because that typically happens on the edge of the sink. It doesn't have a lot of room to move and it just flows off. So I like to use what's dripping off of the surface and I retain a little bit of color so I can sort of make my own little exotic pour cups or just scoop it right onto the surface, which is what I'm gonna do. So I'm just using some leftover color. And this has been set up for a little bit, so it's nice and thick. And I can come and add some detail right over the edges. I'm gonna add a little more of that dark color in there because I think it needs it. Let's see, let's use this amount right here. I'm gonna use some of that spray paint. And what's cool is when you torch this, because it's been set up for a while, it creates some really cool effects. We'll show you that in just a sec. It's really pretty. I'm just gonna grab a little more here. I'm gonna fill in. I like to use that gold. Just create some little tiny effects in there. You can make this as detailed or boring as you want. It just depends on your preference here. I like the sink edges to be pretty detailed. I'm still gonna soften it up with the torch, and I'm still gonna add maybe a little bit of this white by itself to kind of separate some areas. More of that gold. Definitely utilize what you have on your table. So you see how it leaves all those little dots? I personally love that effect. So I will do that same process and add just little touches towards the edges, even where it may have gotten soft. Like for instance, right here, it's really soft. I might just take a little strip here and give it some interest. So I add that here and there. So it's not just on the sink edge and it all ties in. But that's how you can get some effects after your sink has gotten boring. You can also put it into a small cup like this and just create another exotic pour cup and then pour it on top. It's your choice. Okay, this is day 2 and I'm ready to do my flood coat, and I do that with 3.5 ounces per square foot, and I'm using Stonecoat Art Coat. I've mixed up some buckets already. I have my trowel ready and I'm gonna go ahead and pour it out for you. I sanded the surface with 220 first, being really careful where I sand with that bright gold spray paint, because that will ruin it and take off that effect. I also added some diamond dust because she wanted some bling in here. I'm just kind of getting it out of my bucket, leaving enough for my 2 other surfaces. I'm gonna bring this on over here. That, and I have 1 extra bucket here for the backsplash. Maybe more than I need there, so I'll tip that over there. I heat up the epoxy first before I start troweling it out. It's just going to help it move a bit. Okay, so you can see my trowel gets a lot of use, and I stand it up when I'm done, and I'm supposed to pull the epoxy right off, but sometimes I don't do it, but it still works just fine. The key here is to go at an angle, like a 45, because you don't want to scratch your surface. If you go straight down, it'll scratch it. You don't want to go too hard, but it's just going to help you move the epoxy around and make sure that you have an even amount across your whole surface and you don't end up with a huge glob right in the middle and really thin somewhere else. I usually will help it along the edges, and especially on a rock edge, I really don't want too much epoxy going over. It will flow over, but I don't need it to be super thick. So I'll usually use my hand in small areas like this, but I'll trowel it just to make sure that it's not too thick somewhere. And just like with every other project, I'm always going to tell you to rub underneath your edges so that way it flows underneath your surface and it won't create a lip. Pro tip, if you leave your buckets upside down on plastic, you can pull that epoxy right out. I noticed that if it's art coat, it takes about 2 days for me to cleanly pull it out. Sometimes with the regular stone coat, I can do it sooner, but 2 days is about average. and you can reuse your buckets. Now, if you notice that you have too much epoxy on one surface because you just dumped it out, like this, I feel like is going to be very thick. I'll usually take a little bit on my trowel and put it on the other counter where I think it could use more. Now, the reason why I do 3.5 ounces a square foot instead of 3, which is what it says on the bottle, I like my flood coats to be just a bit thicker. I feel like it lays out better and you don't have any fish eyes. And then anything that you had to remedy, like sand out from your flood coat, from your color coat, that'll help fill in any of those low spots that might have created themselves. So this is a lot of epoxy in the center. So I'm gonna do the same thing and scoop. I'm gonna bring it right over here to my sink edge. All right, so I mentioned chopping. So this is what chopping is. I just come around and smack the surface, not in a row, not in a line, not in a pattern. All this is doing is breaking any surface tension, so that way if there wasn't epoxy there, this will help it start to flow into those dry spots and everything can start to self-level. It also helps me find where it's really thick and I need to thin it out. So all that extra epoxy that I drizzled here, I'm just blending that in now so it doesn't leave a big high area. This is what I mean by pushing it into the nooks and crannies. Really push your hands into it. This also helps get rid of any trowel lines. So as you saw, as I was moving the trowel, it can create lines. So by chopping this, it removes those. Okay, so here's the tip. Always start your torch in the air because there could be dust accumulated at the tip that you don't want to get into your piece. So start it off your piece and then point it. I like to get these type of torches, these benzomatic. I can turn it upside down and it will still work. I don't have to worry about having it at a certain angle. I also wrap it in press and seal so that way I don't epoxy the nozzle strip, the trigger, I guess. So as you notice, it's a sweeping motion when you do this. Just keep your torch flowing. You don't want to spend too much time in one area. You don't want to overheat it. It's just starting to get the bubbles out and then let it flow. You're going to torch this 3 more times anyhow. But if you torch too close or too long, you could burn your epoxy and discolor it. My first torch is kind of my fastest one, again, because we're going to continue to torch. This just allows it to start to level out. Now if you see a hole and it's not filling in, just touch it and the epoxy will start to flow. Okay, now some people will ask me, do you torch your edges? I do torch my edges one time. In a rock edge especially, because sometimes it can blow bubbles, there's a little air pocket or something, so I'll do like a quick torch like that, just to help it flow and pop any bubbles that I may have put in there by rubbing the edges. Same thing on a smooth edge, I'll do one quick torch just to pop any bubbles that I may have created. Otherwise, don't torch your edges. The edges are already thin and you don't want to make them thinner. Okay, I think that's about it. I'm going to torch 3 more times. I set a timer for 10-minute intervals. And then at the end of 3 torches, I don't even consider that my first torch. That's just one to get everything starting to level. So I do 3 more times in addition to this first one. And then as long as I don't see any other bubbles, I'm good to go. I usually wipe my drips around the 4.5 hour mark. It just depends on the temperature where you're pouring. In here I notice Art Coat takes longer. I can even wipe drips around 5 hours. But you want to be around so you can tend to that, wipe them with a popsicle stick, so that way you don't have to grind a lot of that off after the fact. Tomorrow we will do the ultimate top coat in matte finish. I'll do my best to record that for you, and if not, you will see the final reveal upon installation. All right, we're ready to apply the matte UTC to these countertops. We are using 9-inch rollers. And we're gonna show you how we avoid lap lines. Travis is gonna use a 4-inch roller and start going over the roundovers to make it easier for me so I don't have to worry about it dripping too much. Our ratio is whatever square feet it is, we multiply that by 0.375, and that tells us how many ounces of mixed UTC we need. However, I always round up, especially with these 9-inch rollers, because Travis is going to prime his dry roller a little bit in it, and it also soaks up more material. So we need to have a little bit extra on hand, so I usually go up to the next amount. So he will get all the edges and inside the sink edge while I do the top surfaces. Want to get the front of the sink too? Once I get done with the initial rolling out, I'm going to back roll starting from where I began, just to smooth out any lines, make sure that I have complete coverage and no peekaboos. Jeremy?
Yes.
Can you take this, please? Hold on to it. I'll need it for that counter. So I'm using no pressure here at all. Just letting the roller roll over everything. Wow, that's a lot right there. Okay.
You'll have to hit this again on the back roll.
I want to give Jeremy that roller, and I'll make sure that everything's pushed into the rock edge while you dry roll. There's a lot of material. Watch out, please. Okay. I don't know if you're going to need to prime too much. I have a lot of material on this side.
You need it? So what I'm doing right now, while the camera's not following me.
Oh, it's following me. Hi. Sorry, hold on to this.
Back over here.
Yeah,
Stay near me. So I lightly primed my roller about like that. I don't want to get it saturated, but I'm just going back forward, picking up the roller. I'm not pulling back on it. I find that on these larger projects,
We're hopefully tracking Travis.
I need to roll forward.
I'm gonna come over
Now
here.
if it's a
since
smaller
tracking.
counter,
All right, there
I
you
can go forward and come back. But like I said, generally speaking, I find that I have less lap lines when I'm pushing forward or pulling back. The idea is to get it in the same direction every turn, because I don't want to go changing the shape of my dry roller. So if I'm going back and forth, I've seen that it kind of fights the woven material a little bit.
And then so while he does that, I'm taking the dry roller, I'm pushing it into the rock edge, making sure there's not a bunch of material stuck in the nooks and crannies. And then I'll also go around the sink edge. And then we are going to switch over to this counter. This is the Butler counter
Are we using
next
the same
to it.
material here?
Yeah, same material.
Sometimes this material likes to sit in and pool into the little cavitations of the rock edge feature.
You know, a little tip and trick on that is also keep a little material in your pan after you're done and let your matte finish start to set up. on your counter. So that way you can go around and get down low to the rock edge and make sure you don't see any shiny spots. You can then take like a little sponge or your roller and just gently dip it into the remaining material, even if it's kind of thick, just to be able to fill in anything that is still shiny that might have gotten missed. And that ended up being the perfect amount of material. Okay, I'm gonna back roll real quick.
So you got this one?
Yeah. I'm gonna come on this side.
All caps.
Yep.
Done?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'll take that. He's gonna do this one, and then we will remix, reset, and work on the back counters. You don't want to have too much material mixed up in advance. It will set up in your pan. It'll start getting tacky and it's really hard to work with. So this was 18 ounces of mixed material with 3 ounces of water. So I do half an ounce of water for every 3 mixed ounces of UTC for the matte finish. And that's it.
Again.
I'm sorry?
Gotta roll this one again.
I will.
Touch it up.
And that's it. Also, you want to take your roller for UTC and push it underneath your edge like this, because a lot of times it'll stay shiny. So just do a quick roll underneath. And that's it. We'll show you the final reveal upon installation.